Okay, so let's close this and this. All right, hopefully we're recording. Hopefully you can see my entire screen this time. Okay, so all right, here we go. Let's talk lab 1. So last day you installed our studio, you installed R, and so today we're just gonna get started and kind of navigate our files here. So to test run our installation, you're gonna start a new R Markdown document. So we're only gonna be working in our Markdown documents and shorthand RMD files. Okay? So if you're running it for the first time, then it might ask you, hey, do you wanna install some packages? And yes, you do. So just let those install. And then you should get this page here. Okay, where it lets us fill in what we want our title to be and who the author is. Right? I'm the author for this one. And so, and then we get 3 default output formats. Okay, we're going to use HTML, and for everything that you hand in, I'm expecting to see HTML. You could do PDF, but you have to install more packages or more software rather. Or you could knit to Word if you want to see what it looks like, but like I said, I'm going to expect to see HTML. So we'll just do HTML. Once you hit OK, you get this default document, right? Just showing us kind of how an RMD file works. So the idea behind this file is that we're going to have some text that we want to knit with some R code, right? So we see these little gray areas, and that's going to be R code, which we'll talk about later, right? So we have some text, right? Imagine a report, you have text, and then you have some analyses, right? And so this RMD file just lets us knit these 2 things together, okay, in one document. So just to give it a go, we can hit knit, right? And notice that it's not saved yet, so it's gonna make us save it somewhere. So I'm gonna call this lab 1. Rumor has it that it can handle spaces in the names now. It didn't used to be able to, so I guess I'm old school that way. So I won't put any spaces, I'll use underscores or no spaces at all. Okay. And then I want to make sure that I remember where I saved it, so I'm going to save it to my documents, because that's going to be our working directory. Okay. So how the rest of the labs will work is you'll download an RMD file from me, and you'll want to move it from your downloads to your working directory, right, wherever you want to be working on the labs from. Okay. You don't want to be working out of your downloads, because it's not a very safe place to be working on stuff. Right? And if you're working on the school computers, you don't want to work from your desktop, because I guess it gets cleared. So, so you'll want to put it in your documents. Okay. And so once I hit save here, right, then it gets to work and it produces this knitted document. Cool. So it knows the title is lab 1, it knows I'm the author, it knows the date, and then we have some text here, some R code in the gray area, and also the R output for that code. Okay. And we can do things like we can put plots in, right? So we'll talk about that later. Okay, so this top area, right, separated by 3 dashes, is called the YAML. Okay? So I want to mention that because a lot of the time we might say, oh, whoops, I want to put my last name in there as well, right? And then when I try to knit it, right? It's going to complain. So we get this error in YAML. Okay? And so the YAML we know is this top part, so then we know that there's an error up here, right? And then you say, oh, I did change my name and I forgot to add in the quote, right? So it'll try to direct you to where it's finding the error, right? And so part of my job is just exposing you to all these different error codes that could happen, and then you'll know how to deal with them, right? For all our RMD files, there's going to be this weird chunk, right? This code chunk. You can just ignore it. It has to be there, but you can just ignore it. Okay. And so, oh, I guess I should make sure that it knits now that I've fixed it. So working in Markdown is a little bit different because we have to keep knitting, right? We're used to seeing things change immediately if you're working in Word, for example, but we have to knit constantly, right? And so it's good to get in the habit of just knitting, I don't know, every couple of minutes or so, just to make sure everything's working the way you think it's going to be working. Okay. Cool. So let's start by talking about some things that we might want to do in Markdown. So Markdown is the language that we're using for the text. And so in this white area, we have the text. Okay, so these hashtags denote a header. So it shows the header level. So if I copy this and I make a new header with just one hashtag, that's going to be a first level header. So it's going to be even bigger than the second level header. So imagine chapter 1, section 1.1, right? Section 1.1.1, we can make a third level header if we wanted to, right? And so let's have a look at, let's get crazy, maybe a fourth level header. Right? So these are headers, right? Just various sizes. Okay? And they're just used to break up our sections. Okay? So I'm going to delete most of this text and just work with, this is an R Markdown document. Okay? So we might want to be able to do things like bold, italicize words, or even bold and italicize words, right? So let's start by putting 2 stars around a word or a string of words if we want. Okay? And when we knit it, we see that it becomes bold. So that's cool. Okay. What if we want to italicize our Markdown, right? More than one word. You can knit it. Right? We put underscores around it. And if we want to bold and italicize something, then we just wrap it up in star, star, underscore, right? So we use both of those commands. And I think it doesn't matter the order, as long as you keep the stars together and the underscores in the same sequence around the word or words, it should be fine. So now we have a bold, italicized document. And of course, we can change the punctuation to things like an exclamation mark. Okay. Cool. So those are things that you might want to be able to do with the text. We might also want to make a list. So here is a list. And as a fact, if you're making a list, the first thing you have to have is a space between the text, right? This would be the text and your list. And so our list starts with a dash. And then you have to have a space between the dash and the word in your list, right? So I have to get juice, and I have to get milk, and I have to get, oops, eggs. Right? So let's make sure that this list is behaving the way we need it to. Hey, that looks great. So here's a list. Yeah, great. Okay. Just to have a look at what happens, right, if we don't have a space between here, the text and the list, it just doesn't recognize that you wanted a list, right? So it just puts them all on the same line, which isn't what you want, right? So if we put a space between there, and what if, like when I was initially typing, right, I forgot a space? What does that look like? Same idea, right? It just joins the milk with the dash eggs, and it doesn't recognize that it's a new bullet point. Right? So if you're making lists, then those are the two things you have to keep an eye out for, right? A space between your text and your list, and then a space between your dash and your item. Okay. Here is a numbered list. So we can also make numbered lists. Same thing, right? We have to have a space between, and we start it with the number that we want our list to start with, right? So 1 period, space. We have to work on stats, and then we have to work on math, and then we can do everything else, right? So if we knit this, we get this numbered list. Okay. So what's pretty cool is, even though it looks the same, right, as what we had here, right, in our code, we can move this around. So say I'm gonna prioritize everything else, right? And like I said, it's gonna start the list with 3 and then move down 4, 5. So it doesn't actually care what the rest of the numbers are, as long as they are numbers, right? So now the list starts at 3 and then goes to 4 and then 5. So as long as you've changed this and you want your list to start with 1, then it'll go 1, 2, 3. Okay. So for other tips on manipulating text, Google Markdown. Okay. So the language is Markdown that we're using for the text. Okay. This is probably more than what we'll need in this course, right? So we'll use headers. You might want to bold things, and you might want to make some lists. But besides that, just plain text is all, that's fine, right? And no formatting, right? Just your spacing, right? Because the knitting formats your document for you. Okay. So, cool. So that's the text component, right? Now let's talk about the R code, right? Remember, R is the language that we're learning, right, to do our analyses. And so in our knitted documents, we denote an R code chunk by 3 ticks, right? 3 ticks, curly brackets, and then all it needs is a lowercase r in brackets, right, in the curly brackets. Okay. And that's just saying, hey, here comes some R code, get ready to run some R code here. And then we have to close it up with 3 ticks. If you forget a tick, notice it extends the gray area until it closes the 3 ticks, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to be careful. And the tick is underneath the escape key. right? So it's way up in the left-hand corner. Okay. And so 3 ticks ends with 3 ticks and starts with a curly bracket with an R in it, just saying, hey, here comes some R code. Okay. Even though we deleted the cars up here, so it used to say cars like this, that's just the name of this code chunk. So we can delete it and we can run it, so we can knit it, and it'll still work. Right. We name our code chunks if we have lots of them, right, and we want to be able to search them. For our case, we won't be generating that many chunks, so we don't have to name them, but we can if we want to. Right? So the only thing we need is tick, 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 curly bracket R, end curly bracket, and then 3 ticks to close it off. Yeah. So then we have, in here, we have some R code. So this is our first R code that we're seeing. And so it's saying, make a summary of the cars data set. In general, when you read these things, I want you to read, so the command here is summary, right? And then read the brackets as of, right? So summary of cars. And so what's nice about R is it knows some data sets by default. So cars being one of those, pressure is another data set that it just knows. And you can just Google data sets included in base R and it'll give you a list and descriptions. My favorite one is probably the chick weight data, which I'll show you in a second. Okay. And so now that we're working in R code, right, we can move over. So we've got this R Markdown file. We haven't been working in here. It's just there. Right? It shows this when it's working. But if you move over to the console down here in the left-hand corner, then this is our R console. Okay. So this is where we can run our R code and make sure that it's working. So we can copy this and paste it down here at the prompt. Right? I call it a caret or a prompt. So if we want to look at summary of cars, right, this is what it would look like. So cars has 2 variables, speed and distance. So if we just wanted to look at the cars data set, we can just type in cars and it'll show it to us. So there's 50 data points, and if we scroll up, right, the first variable is speed and the second variable is distance. So both of those are numerical variables, right? And so, next lab. And so we can look at the summary of each of them, right? It'll generate summaries for categorical variables, but they won't make sense, right? So it can generate them, but they won't make sense. And we've seen this summary, right? This is the 5-number summary plus the mean, right? So it has the minimum, the first quartile, the median, the mean thrown in there, the third quartile, and the maximum, right? So we talked about that in class and how do we generate this. If you are using this to check your work from your assignment, that's great. Just be aware that R uses a more sophisticated way of finding the median and the quartiles, so you might not get the exact same answer. So that's just a heads up. Okay. R doesn't use the boop, boop, boop method. So like I said, R knows some data sets, and my favorite is the chick weight data. And so it comes up with, hey, do you mean the chick weight data? Okay. So we can have a look, and it only prints 250 values. I just like it because it's cute to think of this data set. So what it is there's little baby chicks, and so they each have a number, and they're each fed some specific diet, diet 1, diet 2, and then they're weighed over time. right? So I think at 0 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, I think it's weeks, or maybe it's days, or I'm not sure. But I think it's just cute to think of them growing and over time. So, cool. All right. So one thing that we need to keep in mind is that our RMD file, right, the one that's being knitted, has to be a standalone document. So even if we've done stuff down here in the console, right, if we want it in our document, we have to run that same code up here somewhere in the gray area, right? And it has to come in the order that we ran it. Okay. So, for example, if I accidentally cut this plot of the pressure, right, and I run it down here, hit enter, right, it'll show me the plot of the pressure data, right? So the temperature increases and the pressure increases. Okay, cool. So now we're saying, oh great, I got this plot here. And so that's all good. But now when I try to knit it, remember I deleted it from here, so it's not actually in this document here. It's only down here. So then when I knit it, and I try to scroll down, this is the end of the line, right? And so it doesn't have the code for that plot, right? I'm trying to scroll here, but I'm at the bottom. So then we need to think, okay, sorry, I forgot that I took it out, right? Or I accidentally took it out. So now when we knit it, it'll have that plot that we were expecting to see. Okay. So that's one of the main frantic requests or questions that I get is I've generated the plot and I managed to get the plot and I can see it in my lower right-hand corner, but when I knit my document, it's not there. So what's going on? So then that just means that your Markdown document, it doesn't have the code for the plot, or it doesn't have everything yet that it needs for the plot, right? For now, we'll just leave it at this, but later on, right, you might want to visit your history tab over in the right-hand corner, right? And so it just has a history of all the commands that I've run recently. Okay. Cool. But for now, let's hide that ugliness. Okay. So that's lab 1. So we talked about how do we manipulate the text in here, right? And then just briefly, we talked about the R code, right? How it's structured. And we looked at the summary command, and we didn't really talk about the plot command, but it just a plot of the pressure data set. We'll talk more about plots and the summary in later labs. Okay, cool. So that should get you well on your way to mastering R. All right. Thanks for watching.